Hey everybody, it's Tony Cottaspoti from GreatVocalMajority.com. I put this slide presentation together about what is supply-side economics and is it really trickle-down economics. There's a lot of misconceptions out there regarding what supply-side economics is. A lot of people call it trickle-down economics, and I want to put some of those misconceptions to rest. So let's get started. Let's take a look first of all at one very fundamental economic principle, and that is everything in the economy is a price. Everything. Every good is a price, every service is a price, everything of economic value is a price. Price is the expression of economic value. Now, when you talk about price, the things that determine price are supply and demand. So what I've done here is I put together a very simple supply and demand chart, quantity versus price. Quantity, as you see here on the vertical axis, versus price on the horizontal axis. This is kind of like an economics 101 sort of chart. And I'll show you how supply and demand interact with each other to determine price. Now first, what you see here are two dashes. On the top you got the blue line. That's demand, and down here is supply. Now, let's just use an example of something we all know and love, ice cream. If you wanted to buy ice cream and you knew that the price of ice cream was close to zero, you would demand quite a bit of it, right? But you probably wouldn't find much of it because who's willing to sell it to you for $1 or under $1? Probably not too many people. So that's why you see the supply down here so far below demand. But as you increase the price of the supply, you'll see the supply curve begin to edge up and demand curve begin to come down. That's because the price is going up. Fewer people are willing to spend as much. That means the demand comes down. And as the price goes up, suppliers are willing to provide more. And that continues until at around, in this particular example, at around $7.50, supply and demand intersect. And then we'll continue extrapolating out the rest of the supply and demand curves. So there's your demand curve. Starts out at 50, goes down all the way to $13, and here's the supply curve going from basically zero up to $13. Now, the point at which you see this intersection is the equilibrium point or the price point. That's basically where supply equals demand. The people who want to sell it at a particular price will provide a certain amount at a particular price, which just so happens to be the amount that people are demanding and the price they're willing to pay. That's why it's called equilibrium, because everybody's happy. But this is just a very simple free market type example of supply and demand. There are other things that go on that we'll talk about that affect both supply and demand. Now in the economy, there are essentially in supply side theory, there are basically two elements to the economy. There is labor, as you see all the people here that are different types of workers, office workers, construction workers, and so on. That's labor. The other element in the economy is capital. Capital and labor. Labor needs capital. Without capital, labor's not going to get money, not going to be compensated. But capital also needs labor. It's a two-way street. In order for capital to appreciate, in order for new capital to be created, capital needs labor to add that value. Now, what affects the price of labor and capital? Now, we already talked about supply and demand, so we know that. But what affects supply and demand? There are other things. It's not just about supply and demand. Labor and capital prices are affected by other externalities, things I'll call externalities, things like taxes and regulations, government mandates, like the Affordable Care Act and the employer mandate and the individual mandate is a government mandate. from Obamacare. Trade agreements and treaties, these are all externalities. Taxes and regulations can affect greatly not only the price of labor and capital, but its availability. When capital, for example, is taxed in capital gains taxes, that reduces the amount of capital that's available for investment and business expansion. And similarly, when there are taxes on employment, that also affects the supply and demand for labor. Now, in supply side theory, I like to use something I call the supermarket example. Again, going back to this thing about ice cream that I tend to love so much. Just as people are willing to buy more ice cream when it's on sale at a lower price, businesses are more willing to buy more labor by hiring more people if it costs them less to do that. So you can understand how that works. I mean, you don't go to the supermarket when the prices are higher. You go there when they're lower because you want to get more for your money. But is it really as simple as all that? Well, of course it's not. There is one more thing. Employers need a reason to hire more people, and supply-side economics gives them that reason. That reason is more demand for what they're selling. Now, how do we get there? Well, by increasing the take-home pay of average workers, you can increase demand. They do that through across-the-board flat rate reductions in the tax rates for people in their withholding taxes. But how does that help employers hire people? That's a very fair question. How do you go from reducing taxes on people who are working, withholding taxes, to more jobs? How do you go from one thing to the other? Well, it works kind of like this. Studies have shown that when an employee has an increase in take-home pay of let's say $1, their consumer spending increases by more than that, by between $1.10 and $1.15. So what they do once they get that extra money, they go to the store and they spend it here. So what you basically have is you're reducing the taxes and regulatory burdens on business, essentially giving more cash to the business owners to allow them to expand if they choose. On top of that, you're reducing the tax rates and the withholding taxes on these people up here who were the customers of these people down here. You're basically giving people more cash. So instead of the government holding on to the money and distributing it through the spending process of government, which is very political, of course, you're democratizing the money by giving it to consumers and business owners who will make their spending decisions based on their own circumstances, which has a wider, broader, and deeper impact because people making their own decisions about their own money make better decisions than the government, a third party, spending money on behalf of a fourth party. That all leads to more consumer demand. So as these guys here get the extra money in take-home pay and they go to this guy's store over here who has also more money to expand with, he sees more business coming his way. He has the money necessary to expand, and guess what he does? He hires people. That's supply-side economics. Now, does that sound like trickle down? No, it's not trickle down because, as I just said, it's democratized. You're basically giving the money that taxpayers would have paid back to the taxpayers. Now, it's true, you're not redistributing the income to poor people. You're not redistributing from wealthy people to poor people. You're just returning the money to the people who would have paid it otherwise, and you're enticing them through regulatory burden lifting and other ways for them to spend that money, We know the consumers will spend the money because history has told us this. And we know that businesses are likely to expand when they see brighter prospects of consumer demand. So that's not trickle down. But let me show you what trickle down economics really is. This man here in this picture is John Maynard Keynes. He created the economic theory called Keynesian economics. Now, Keynesian economics says that when the government spends $1, it has to trickle through the economy, and as it does, it creates more than $1's worth of economic activity. Keynes believed that when you had an economic crisis like after the First World War in Europe, or after when the Great Depression hit in 1929, that government spending by itself would stimulate economic growth. And it's a very centralized and center-focused, government-focused way of looking at economic management. Now, it's not to say it doesn't work, but the interesting part about it is that it is centralized. So and it's government spending. And government spending, as I mentioned just a minute ago, is very politicized. And it's not people spending their own money. It's a third party, the government, spending money that they got from somewhere else, and they're spending it on yet another group of people or persons. And that's the least efficient way to spend money. So, but that is trickle down. So what Keynes did, and this is probably the worst thing that he did, he gave every politician since the 1920s the greatest excuse to not be fiscally responsible, because Keynes allowed for politicians to deficit spend. And for the last 60 or 70 years, that's what's been going on. Government has been deficit spending. And it's akin to taking water out of one end of the pool and bailing out that end of the pool to the other end of the pool. It doesn't really create anything. So it's not an efficient way for the government, for anybody, to try to grow an economy. So Keynesian economics truly is trickle down because it's the government, the central authority, spending money and using political decisions, by the way, to spend it, and then it filters through the economy in a trickle-down process. It doesn't hit as wide a swath of people or the sections of the economy as individuals spending money, but millions and millions of individuals, working individuals and businesses spending money would help the economy. That should be just very obvious on its face. So that's really what I wanted to do with this video, is show you what supply-side economics is and how it is not really trickle down. That's all I really had to say on this. I hope you got something out of this. This is one of the things I'm interested in doing is creating these short kind of educational sort of videos. At greatvocalmajority.com, my website. You can come there and look around. I have other tools that you can utilize. I'm adding things all the time. I really appreciate you taking time to watch the video. Take a look at my website and let me know that you've been there. Give me some suggestions if you like, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks a lot, guys.